This is an ancient word from Romans 8:26 to 39. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought. But that very Spirit intercedes with groanings too deep for words. And God, who searches hearts, knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. We know that all things work together for the good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Her purpose. For those whom God foreknew, God also predestined to be conformed to the image of Jesus Christ, in order that he might be the firstborn within a large family. And those whom God predestined, God also called, and those whom God called, God also justified, and those whom God justified, God also glorified. What then are we to say about these things? If God is for us, who is against us? If God, who did not withhold God's own Son, Christ, but gave Christ up for all of us, how has God not with Christ also given us everything else? Who will bring any charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? It is Christ who died, or rather, who was raised, who is also at the right hand of God, who also intercedes for us. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will affliction, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? As it is written, for our sake, we are being killed all day long. We are accounted as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than victorious through God, Christ, who loves us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. And I will continue with a contemporary word from a hitting wholeness, The Journey Towards an Undivided Life by Parker J. Palmer. I pay a steep price when I live in a divided life, feeling fraudulent, anxious about being found out, and depressed by the fact that I am denying my own selfhood. The people around me pay prices well, for now they walk on ground made unstable by my undividedness. How can I affirm another's identity when I deny my own? How can I trust another's integrity when I deny my own? A fault line runs down the middle of my life, and whenever it cracks open, divorcing my actions from the truth I hold within, things around me get shaky and start to fall apart. But up north in the wilderness, I sense the wholeness hidden in all things. It is in the taste of wild berries, the scent of sun-baked pine, the sight of the northern lights, the sound of the water lapping the shore, signs of bedrock, eternity, that is eternal and beyond all doubt. And when I return to a human world that is transient and riddled with disbelief, I have new eyes for the wholeness hidden in me, and my kind and new heart for loving even our imperfections. And this ends the reading.
Well, I finally decided that it was time in my life as a minister, chaplain, preacher person to actually knuckle down and really read Paul. Now, it's not that I haven't read many snippets from Paul and used lots of in seminary, we read everything, and talked and studied and all of that. But Paul has a lot of big words, for one thing, and they have to be kind of unpacked for the reader. And our passage today didn't have too many of them, actually. Had a few. But as I worked my way through a lot of the Paul material, and Paul starts with Romans, which is what we're working with today. So I haven't even got all the way through that yet. But I just want to say that because I'm going to talk probably more about Paul and his ministry than I am going to talk about what he said exactly in the passage today. But this is about the love of God and how we cannot be separated from it. So I'm going to start by saying Paul wrote letters. We sometimes call them epistles, and some are quite long indeed for what you might think of as a letter. So I'm wondering how many people ever get a personal letter in their mailbox anymore. And I'm not talking about just a card that says happy birthday, because we do sometimes get those in the mailbox. But even that, not so often. They come in a little email with, you click a link and it goes to some dancing bear somewhere that has a happy birthday sign and some music. And it's lovely. I'm glad I get those. But I'm always waiting for that personal letter like I used to get when I was young, or I used to write. I wrote a lot of those too. Anybody here ever write a personal letter to somebody and put it in an envelope with a stamp and send it off? Yeah, a lot of us have, and some of us maybe haven't. I want to tell you a couple things in my life about letters, because Paul was writing what did amount to a letter, even though he's trying to do some particular things, which I'll talk about later, with the things he's writing to the churches that he's established. Or in the case of Romans, he did not establish that church. That church got established in another way in Rome. But he took it upon himself to communicate with them for a couple of reasons, which we'll also get to. But it's a letter in the sense that it was written, it was well thought out, and then it was carried, traveled across long distances to be delivered to somebody who would receive it, and read it to the community, because Paul did not, so much as far as I know, write letters for the most part to an individual. He was writing to a community. So my mother died a number of years back, and it fell to me to clean out her extremely highly organized stuff. And so I would take out something, and like she had in a drawer, she had a set of every key she ever had in her whole entire life, all on a keychain. That was a lot of keys. In another drawer, she had every map that they traveled a lot across the country, every map wherever she lived. She collected it, rubber bands around it, and put it in a drawer. then I took out a suitcase, and in the suitcase was every letter my uncle ever wrote to her. And they were beautiful. Oh, people had penmanship then, it was so beautiful. And now if anybody can write in cursive anymore, we're shocked. But it was beautiful writing, and most of them were from the time when he was on a ship during World War II. And all those letters, every week he'd send a letter. And she kept them all, and there were other letters from her other family members that were sent to her. She kept every single one of them. And my sister keeps those now in a drawer at her house. But I also, going through my mother's things, she had a shed, and it was full of stuff, neatly organized, but still, I'm glad I opened every box, because let me tell you, in case you're ever cleaning out anybody's stuff someday, a box might say taxes 1965, and you're tempted, because you have so much work to do, to take the box and chuck it just immediately right into the trash bin. Open the box, because you don't really know what's in there. And I found some treasures. And one treasure I found was a ammo box, I guess. It's about like this. I think my dad got it when he was in the Army Air Corps up in Alaska. And in it was a lot of personal letters from his first wife, which I had just heard about. There was one, but now the letters were right in front of me that she wrote to him, not the ones, of course, he wrote to her. And then a whole bunch of other letters from his mother to him. And she wrote very chatty letters. So I tried to read those. That's my grandma, and I didn't know her very well. So I read every one of my dad's letters. And in my grandma's letters, they would say things, they'd be like 3 pages long and often typed, and would say, well, your sister did this and your brother did that, and your cousin so-and-so is getting married, and I don't know what we're going to do about the wedding arrangements because the venue fell through, and Mrs. McGillicuddy down the street, she broke her leg, and church was like this, and the bishop said that, and it went on and on and on, and your father, he'll be home pretty soon, and I'm cooking pot roast for him, and I just don't know what's the matter with my kids. I don't know why we're vexed with so many problems, your sister and that man she ran off with, and just things like that, and it just went on. But it would also say to my father, Bob, when are you going to pay back your dad? He's wondering. And things like that. The amazing thing was, my father kept them all. And my father, as far as I knew, never even cracked a pencil to paper to send a letter. He wouldn't answer the phone. And there was this treasure store of letters that somebody had written. And for myself, my mother's father, my grandfather, he liked to travel. And I didn't know him well. He was the one I knew best of my grandparents. And he would send all of his grandkids postcards from wherever he was. He just grabbed some with castles on them, or, the Alps or whatever, wherever he happened to be, and they wouldn't say a lot, but I was only 10 or so years old, and these wonderful little postcards, I still have them. I still have those. So Paul's letters, on the other hand, they're not so chatty, although he does talk about his acquaintances and his fellow ministers and people he travels with, but he writes letters to help the churches that he's started in these various places he's traveled to help them with thorny problems that he's heard from fellow travelers in his world that they're struggling with. And to me, it's kind of amazing even that I'm trying to imagine he writes the letter to the Romans and sends it off to a church where, as I said, he didn't start that church in Rome. Maybe people who were in Jerusalem for Pentecost or something. And people traveled a lot around the Mediterranean, and some people heard the message, were converted to faith in Jesus Christ, and they went back to Rome, and they pulled a few other people together, and the Jewish people had spread all across the Mediterranean lands. So a strong church started there, and he'd heard a lot about it. But what he really heard was that, as in so many places, the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians They didn't agree on following the law. So this particular letter to the Romans was an attempt, a long-winded, perhaps with big words, attempt to explain why both sides were right, I guess I would say. The Jewish people had the law was a good thing. It's just that it wasn't enough. It wasn't going to be the final word. So if a person became baptized into the faith of the Christian world, whether Gentile or Jew, they became a new person. And Jesus, the Christ, who was foretold in the Jewish Old Testament message, dwelled in us now and enabled us all to live a different kind of life. So that's sort of the gist of what the letter to the Romans was about. But he had to be very astute and careful and try not to offend anyone, but to make his point. Now that letter, when it was received, we don't know how it was received exactly, but when it was received, someone had to read that whole thing, and had to either read it to the congregations in Rome, because there was probably more than one. In all these places where Paul writes a letter to the Corinthians or to whoever he's writing them to, there's not just one congregation somewhere. There's many. So how do people get this message? Well, maybe a lot like we do, in bits and pieces over time, because it's an awfully lot to digest in one sitting or one reading. So just to go back a little bit and say about Paul and his establishing these churches, as we all know, if we have been around a while, Paul had a conversion experience. He was a Jewish Pharisee who was persecuting Christians. He was rounding them up and sending them off to jail, basically. He had a bad reputation among Christians. See where I'm going with that for sure. He was on the road to Damascus one time, and he had this sudden, unexpected, unplanned experience that is written about in the book of Acts, where he was thrown off his horse, a brilliant, bright light blinded him, and a voice spoke to him and said, Paul, why are you persecuting? Saul, actually, he changed his name after this. Saul, why are you persecuting me? And who are you? He wanted to know, well, I am Jesus, the Christ. I'm the one that you persecute. Stop doing it. And there was more about what happened to him related to that. But I like to think that story, which shows up several times in the Bible, but largely in the book of Acts, is there so that people understand that Paul can speak for the Jewish side of the equation, and then God sent him to the Gentiles. Partly, I will say, so he didn't get killed by the angry people who were tired of being persecuted by him. So I was thinking about these stories that travel with Paul that make it be so that people want to explore those letters. Because the letters, they are, in my estimation, a little dense. I have trouble. I'm getting there, though. It's very interesting. I'm finding it great. But I will say this. He was struck blind, thrown from his horse, and sent to proclaim to the Gentiles. And he says it's Jesus, who's sending him. But I'm like, I don't think I want that to happen to me. I do not want to be struck blind and thrown from a horse to be converted. Let's try an easier way if there is one. In any case, he began his work, and he took 3 journeys around the Mediterranean, establishing these churches. And on the way, stories traveled about him too. On his first missionary journey, he is said to have blinded a sorcerer. Obviously, Paul did regain his sight. That's another little bit of the story I won't go into today. But he healed a crippled man, and the crowd thought he and his traveling companion Barnabas must be gods. So they stoned him later, though. They tried to stone him, and he disappeared. He slipped away, got back, and went back to his churches around Antioch. And on his second missionary journey, he traveled farther and established more new churches, and he famously debated philosophers at the Areopagus in Athens, and he spent 18 months establishing a strong church in Corinth. He wrote some of his letters there. And on his third journey, he revived a young man named Eutychus, who fell from a third-story window. So these were stories that were going along with Paul's letters. He didn't have to write them in the letter. People already knew them. But it gave him a certain kind of authority, or if nothing else, some intrigue. Who is this man writing these letters to us? Especially at a church like in Rome, where most of the people there hadn't met him personally. So his main purpose, as I said, of this particular letter was to say that the law of Moses is good, but it doesn't have in itself the power to save, to free a person from the propensity to sin. And what brings life is to be transformed into the likeness of Christ, to become, as it were, a new person. He uses a lot of legal, what we call forensic language, big theological words, justification, which means like being acquitted. In other words, you go to the trial and the judge says, not guilty. That's justification, and God does that rather prolifically to those who are believers. And sanctification and glorification, other words Paul uses liberally in the letter to Romans. Basically, he says, if you suffer with Christ, die with Christ, be resurrected with Christ, you will become conformed to the image of Christ. And that applies to everyone. Well, I may be taking a little liberty there by saying that, because that is my opinion. It does apply to everyone. Some theologians will dispute things like, did God pick out all the people that were going to be justified ahead of time? Or did people who became faithful get justified and others not? So I'm not going into that one either, because that's a long one. That's more for like a Bible study or a class on that whole topic. But how do those words reach into our hearts? Because they are words, and we are so familiar with words. So first I will say, writing it down in a letter is very helpful, much more helpful than listening to someone just speak. Words, even if we are videotaped and you can go back and look at it later, that's not that helpful. Having it in front of you on a page is helpful to see what's being said. But having the person in front of you is also a great blessing, because you find out who's talking to you. Do they believe what they're saying? Are they themselves good and virtuous people who try to live the life they're promoting? Do they understand the words that they're using? Having the person in front of you gives you a lot more feeling for that. And I also wonder about Paul when he was writing these letters. I assume he had a scribe, someone who could get those things written down for him. I'm sure he could write, but he's a busy man. Even when he was in jail, he would compose a letter. And then I wonder if he suspected that his words might be enshrined for posterity. I just wonder. There's been some who said Paul had a sense of himself being like a Moses, like somebody like that significant of a person. Perhaps he thought of himself that way. And the other question that would be big on my mind is when you write even such a expansive and deep set of thoughts onto a piece of paper and give it to another to deliver, what assurance do you have that the letter will arrive at all? You've got marauders, bandits, pirates out on the sea, storms, terrible things happen. I wonder if he had to send those as we do when we put a letter in the mailbox, especially these days. Is it going to get where I'm sending it? I just have to say, one time I got a letter from my very best friend, a high school friend who I lost track of after I got married and moved off when I was young. 5 years later, the letter appeared in my mailbox, invited me to her wedding. So sometimes things don't happen in a timely fashion. But all in all, to talk about anything, whether in writing or speaking, we have to step apart from it a little bit and describe its attributes as we experience them with our senses. And this passage that we have here about how nothing can separate us from the love of God, Paul waxes poetic there. He uses very concrete images, angels and demons and powers, height and depth, and all kinds of things that stir the heart, not just the mind. We remember that passage because of it. How do we talk about something like love that cannot be divided? I was looking this up, and I was looking at light because I thought, well, you can't really divide light up that much either. There's all this light. Yes, you can. You put a prism in front of it, you shoot a light through it, and it splits into all of its different wavelengths, which are different colors perceived in the brain. Love, can you shoot it through a prism and have it split into different things? No, it's one thing. It's one thing. Love is whole and complete. And how can it be the subject of examination when we're surrounded and immersed in it? It's kind of like that analogy you've probably heard of: the fish in the water aren't aware of the water until, of course, you take them out of it. Paul says that would be an impossibility. We cannot be separated from God's love. You can't take us out of God's love. You can't take God's love away from us. What if Paul wrote a letter to the churches today? What if he wrote a letter to the community church of Mill Valley? What would he say? Maybe he'd say something like this. Because even though you're all brilliant people, are very, very smart and can handle all the big words, even much better than me, for sure, I want to say, I think what God would say, Paul would say to you is, God's love is not divided nor diminished by the divisions and transitions of this world. The world itself is only sustained by this love. Love is beyond a feeling, and yet you can feel it when you step into it. Nothing can describe it for you. It is not a category of thought or symbolic representation, but a word must suffice to point you toward it. All manner of story and example must present evidence of love's pervasive influence. We speak about acts of love for one another, yes, yet love in itself is so much more. In it, we live and move and have our being. As things may crumble around us, as we suffer the dissolution of the structures that we so carefully built up, the one and the only, the most wonderful thing that remains without fail is love. Amen.